Times of change mean that sometimes we don't know how to make sense out of what's happening because we don't have, we're looking at something that's new. We're living in a time of accelerating change, and that acceleration is largely caused by technological developments. You know, in the last 25 years, the internet has changed so much. Smartphone has changed the way people get information and communicate with each other. We're on the verge of important changes in artificial intelligence, biotechnology, robotic development. All these subjects, different artists are working with these materials in the exhibition. In information theory, we talk about noise and signal. And the signal is the meaningful information, but you can only see it if it's set against a background of meaningless information, noise. And art is constantly playing with the ratio of signal and noise. And it's looking through things that we consider noise, reorganizing the way you see it, and suddenly you see signals you didn't see before. So this is where art can help us live in interesting times. I like the idea that biennales happen every 2 years. It's like a clock. It's like a time when you get to stop and reflect on developments that artists are looking at over the last 2 years. We have very polarized communication in many countries, especially in the West right now. Politically, two sides that can't even speak to each other because they're not referencing the same world of facts. They live in parallel universes. To me, what's interesting about art is that it's the exact opposite of this narrowing of information. Artists are constantly looking at things and bringing new ideas, bringing new connections between things that the rest of us don't pay attention to. Art's about opening up our information landscape and finding new ways to discern and see things that we're not seeing. So I decided to focus the Biennale on that aspect of art, how it helps us to see connections between things that we normally aren't seeing. And because artists have very multidimensional practices, I thought it would be interesting to have two separate exhibitions in the Biennale, which I'm calling Proposition A and Proposition B, but to have the same artists in both shows. Because what artists are doing is they're not repeating themselves. They're often looking at different subjects, using different methods, working in different ways, bringing different perspectives to it. And I wanted to focus in this way on this nature of artistic practice as being multidimensional, rather than on specific works. And I think it's very interesting when you see one part of the show and you meet these works by different artists, and you go to the other show, and it's like going to a parallel universe. It's the same people, but they're doing different things. So there's a photographer from South Africa, Zanele Muhali, who makes wonderful images using her own body and face, but images that aren't about her or her psychology so much as they're about the history of image making, about political history in South Africa. And her response to this invitation to submit two different types of work is that in the Arsenale, which is the bigger space, this old factory, she has these prints that we wallpaper on the walls. They are 3 and 4 meters high, huge billboard-sized images, and in all of them, she's looking directly at you. And her look is an unbelievable look. In the Giardini, her work is much smaller, much more intimately scaled, and in all of these pictures here, she's looking away. And it's the classic way that women have been portrayed in the history of painting and photography as an object to be looked at, not having a subjectivity that confronts the viewer. I think one of the most fascinating pieces in the Arsenale is a work that I think many visitors might not even notice. And this is by Nari Bagramian, a wonderful sculptor who was born in Iran, Armenian parents, grew up in Berlin. And I think when you see a biography like this, you also have to question how much our national attributions mean, right? And on the outside of the Arsenale, Nari has 17 different sculptures which are hung up on the wall. And these sculptures look like fragments of a spinal column, or maybe pieces of an intestine. They have a physical reference, but they also could look like industrial infrastructure on a building. And they relate to the state of decay of the building itself. And I was very touched because one of the men who was helping to install these said to her, "Thank you so much for respecting the beauty of Venice with these sculptures." In the Giardini, in the Central Pavilion, Nari has an ensemble of sculptures made of metal and also wax. And it's the type of wax that's used to polish metal in a sculpture. And there's a sense that if you were going to polish her sculpture, the rest of it would disappear. So there's very interesting where these works play with abstraction, with physicality, the materiality, but they're so different. And one is directly architectural, one sits out on the floor and speaks to the paintings that are hung all around it. So again, two different works, two different approaches. You might not know it was the same artist because they're quite different looking. I think this is coming from a remark that I often quote from an Irish painter who I believe is called Patrick Collins, where he said that art enters through your stomach, it goes up to your heart, and then it goes to your head. And the idea is that first art has to give you a physical sensation. Your eyes are looking at it, or you're walking around a sculpture. What do you feel? And when I say physical sensation, it's also that our emotions we feel physically. Your heart beats faster, or you start to sweat. You experience it in your body. Then, though, the idea is it's not enough. I mean, we can go to a Hollywood movie and experience emotion and manipulation. So what art does is it gives us the chance to go also into this other dimension of thinking. And by thinking, I don't mean analytical thinking, but free associating, making connections. But in order to do that, you have to first be engaged. And you have to have a reason why you want to make this connection. Because why am I having this strange feeling? I want to understand where this comes from. And why I want to understand why I'm suddenly thinking of something completely different. There's got to be a connection. And you begin to have that kind of conversation. What does it mean when you look at this amazing work by Sun Wan and Peng Yu, this giant robotic car arm, kind of used in many car factories in China, but it's been programmed to have 32 different human movements, some of them very graceful. It feels like you're looking at a person moving, but it's this big, heavy, robotic arm, and sometimes it moves very fast, and it's frightening. It seems like it could spin out of control. It's like you're watching a wild animal in the zoo, and it's sweeping up what looks like a big pool of blood, and it's constantly trying to put it into place. And the pool of dark liquid keeps escaping. How do you read this? There are so many different possible ways to make sense of what you're seeing. But it begins with, how does it make you feel? And I think, for me, when I first saw this, there were two first basic feelings. Well, one was you feel like you're looking at a crime scene. There's this red liquid splashed on the walls, this killer robotic arm, right? Big, dangerous. But then it's very charming, the way this arm moves. It's like a fantastic ballet dancer. It could be doing choreographic exercise. So you're seduced also and charmed by this thing. And you have these two very different feelings that are attracting you, and one is making you feel slightly disconcerted or alarmed. When you come to curate a Biennale, you look at what's been done in the last two Biennales or three, and you try to avoid those artists because you feel their work's been shown recently, It's time to let other people have a chance. So this always affects you. Sometimes you're disappointed, and you go, oh, those were the Italian artists I really wanted to show, but they've just appeared in the last two biennales. So you have to look somewhere else. But I think, right now in the United States, a lot of African American artists are making some of the most interesting and important work in the US. I think there are some amazing artists who were born in Africa who are now making work that's very, very important work. Obviously, Asia, over half the world's population lives in Asia. And more and more we're seeing very important work coming from Asia. But it changes. At any one moment, a little local scene can develop, and some small place can have suddenly half a dozen important artists there. In this Biennale, there's a lot of painting, a lot of sculpture above all, and photography. And I think those are three fields where the women are very preeminent in this exhibition. There are many great women artists in the world, and there are women artists from several different generations in this exhibition, maybe a focus on younger artists also. But I think this is just the new normal. I think from now on we're always going to see biennales that are more or less 50-50, and that more and more young people are not so interested in identifying themselves as in a strict binary male-female thing. I don't know where that will end up eventually. I don't think we've seen the end of it. It's evolving.